Hello. Hello, I'm Peter Bell, and I'm here with Mr. Steve Halabura. Hello, Steve.
Yeah, hi. How are you doing, Peter?
Very well, thanks. Nice to talk to you for the first time in an interview here. I've talked to you once before about Royal Helium and advocating you to consider some university research grants, I believe. But
I
look forward to
remember
talking to you
that.
more.
I remember that, Peter, and it's nice to speak rather than back and forth on a keyboard, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely. And I've been watching what you've been doing since then, and things are progressing here. I've heard bits and pieces of information in the news flow about the work you've been doing. I had some sense of what it was going to be back in May. I think it was when we talked, May 2020. We're here looking at the start of October 2020 in a few days, and I've been following you online on LinkedIn recently, connected there, and seeing you with Concept Forge incorporated, uh, and Deep Earth Energy. That's long in the past now, but it seems like you're involved in a variety of interesting things here. So, um, what's on the top of your mind today?
Well, first of all, Peter, I want to compliment you on some of your postings. I've been following what you've been putting up, and very informative, very interesting from a resource and resource investment viewpoint. So kudos to you too for putting up informative and knowledgeable content. Good job.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, you're right. I've been involved in a number of things, but I think that just comes with the territory when you've been involved in a particular sector the length of time, that I have. There isn't much I haven't looked at in the province. That's because, it's my 40th year. I started geologizing in 1980. So many of these ideas and concepts, they're not, they're definitely not mine, but they've been lying there buried. Some of them go back to the 50s. The helium play, for instance, was the first discoveries were late 50s, early 60s. Sort of sat there. Saskatchewan produced helium, through the 1970s into the early 80s. People didn't give it much thought, always overshadowed by the oil industry. Now, I've been involved in the oil patch as well. And, it's unfortunate to see just the difficulties, the boom and bust cycle. I think this is my sixth bust in my career. Probably will boom again, but this is big cyclical flow. That's why, my philosophy is that anyone who wants to be involved in the resource business in the long haul has to diversify. You need a number of tools in your toolbox. You need to be versed in a number of other commodities. Each commodity has its own cycle. And, for years, when the oil patch was down, well, potash was booming. Potash paid the bills. When potash subsided, well, there was petroleum. So if there's any message, Peter, it is that Saskatchewan's got a lot of stuff that can be exploited with a drill bit and technology we've already got. Helium is one of them. And helium is very much the revival of a play of a business that was around back in the 60s, 70s. Suddenly now, helium has got much more significance than it did back then.
Well, I'm more bullish on Saskatchewan than any place in the world, basically. Really, in a global, comprehensive, top to bottom analysis, I don't know of any other place that I like better or have had more wins consistently through my career, being 35 years old and doing this for, over a decade ish, in whatever way you want to define what it is that I'm doing. It's funny, we talked about that research funding that I mentioned to you. And, as I move forward in the junior mining business and I look at the opportunities there are for that stuff, how tight the budgets are for these companies and how much a little bit of government support can go a long way. And I look at Quebec and I look at Newfoundland and Labrador and I look around the world at all the things that governments do to get in the way or to help their natural resource industries. And it's just fascinating stuff. Funny to hear John Horgan, British Columbia Prime Minister at the present day, talking about Barkerville's his favorite place to go on summer vacation. Who knows what's going to happen in BC? I live here and I have a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of things to like in BC, but there's a lot of things to dislike too. So Saskatchewan on balance for me is head and shoulders above the rest, any other place in the rest of the world. One of the
Well,
most bullish things I've ever said, I think, was about the uranium business there and how I really want to see the government leadership step up and start talking about a sovereign wealth fund for the province of Saskatchewan based off the uranium royalties. And I want to see them reinvesting that money into nuclear tech, rare earths processing, on the sideline businesses of uranium mining and the waste processing of nuclear power plants, and blah, 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 blah. There's so much stuff that needs support in a major way, and it needs government to be behind it and not causing problems for these work programs. It has to be done to, the best standards in the world, but I say lead from the front, right? And that's very much what I see, as an outsider. It's what I see Saskatchewan doing in parts. I overall, politically, there's a lot of big problems in Canada and in Saskatchewan that I don't really have a view on. But those things are everywhere, really. And the potential wealth generation from all these natural resources in Saskatchewan, again, are just outrageous. To have a greenstone gold belt in the province too is really good. And you mentioned potash, and I said uranium and rare earths. So I just mentioned the Saskatchewan Research Council as well, to give them a big shout out. They seem to figure some pretty important stuff out recently around rare earths, and they seem to be building a hub facility, $30 million or something like that. I don't know exactly what that means, what that'll entail, but I think that could be, a cornerstone investment for, a new industry in Saskatchewan, which is, processing of monazite and some of these rare earths present in uranium waste streams. Really important stuff, and stuff that most of the world's having a hard time finding any traction on. The history of rare earths, super fascinating and littered with, failures, really, I would say, in the modern time, right? So to be able to break that trend and really have something work would be such a big deal. And helium is another one of those things that, most places around the world, it's kind of, I don't know if people might talk about it, but I'm not betting on it anywhere else. Whereas when this opportunity came up with you and the people involved in this company, Royal Helium, right? What a setup. So, and Saskatchewan Research Council, I mentioned them, and there's been news recently, May 27th, 2020. So not far apart from the dates, Steve, when you and I talked before.
mm-hmm.
Probably
Yep.
after. I probably saw this news release and said, "Oh, sweet, you guys, you know that there's funding out there in the world for companies like you. Sweet, let's keep this trend going. Let's do another one of these." So, I'm really glad that you guys are doing stuff with them already, and kudos to you. Keep it going. Thanks.
If you want to get a good grounding, you speak about government, Peter. The government came out with their growth plan. It's a document, you can download it, Growth Plan 2030. And it is a blueprint of what the province has and what the province can do in the next decade to really significantly increase resource production across the spectrum. It's a great, great document. And a lot of people, they contact me and they say, "Well, Steve, what are the opportunities? What should I do?" I say, go to the growth plan, because it's one of the few plans where there are actual points. You can check them off. You can say, "Hey, I can do this. I can do that." It covers more than just resources. It includes ag. It includes the innovation sector. includes manufacturing, but it's really, really a good document. So that's the first recommendation I'd make to you, Peter. If you want to keep following the story, look at the growth plan. And another thing about Saskatchewan is it's one of those jurisdictions that you can pick up the phone and you can get to an assistant deputy minister or a deputy minister. You know, they'll take your call and you can discuss things with them. I really like that about Saskatchewan. So just to circle back on those commodities, you hit on a lot of the big ones. And again, they've been here a long time, but it's just the global marketplace has changed so dramatically. Rare earths, the mineral deposits up north, and also the brine-based rare earths, that they've been around. People know that there's these certain concentrations, but it wasn't until there was that 21st century need and demand that now it makes sense going after lithium, cobalt, potash. Potash has always been so critical from the viewpoint of feeding the world. Geothermal power, if deep succeeds, that will open a new paradigm. And that's important for the city of Estevan because of the mandated closure of coal-fired generation, again, by 2030. What else are you going to do with the skilled people? What are you going to do with the resources? Helium is a great one because there too, people joke and say, well, it's for balloons, but also MRIs, purging rocket fuel tanks so that it doesn't explode. Huge requirements for what is turning out to be a critical 21st century commodity. Helium is somewhat like potash. You don't find it everywhere. It's concentrated in certain areas. And why I've really enjoyed working with Andrew and the Royal team is it's not that we're inventing something out of the blue, but a lot of the heavy lifting and work has been done before. The government studies from the early 1960s laid it all out. They said, hey, you know, sometimes when you drill these basement structures, guess what? You don't hit flammable gas, you don't hit methane, but you hit inert gas, nitrogen or CO2 that, hey, just happens to have some helium in it. And a lot of this stuff has been mapped, Peter. Engineering work's been done on it. So it is easy to pick up the traces. This is more a case of reviving plays from the 1950s and 1960s than completely creating something new out of the blue. Back in 1961, 62, there wasn't the infrastructure that we have now, or necessarily the market. That has changed, but nothing has changed as far as the material in the ground goes. Your idea or your concept of a new sovereign wealth fund, where, yeah, uranium revenues, royalties go into that. Same with potash. Same with petroleum. Saskatchewan can be self-sufficient not only in what it needs, but also economically. And just think about what that can do. You know, Saskatchewan's a province without a lot of people. There's our Indigenous people, sovereign Indigenous nations. There are the established businesses. There are the entrepreneurs. There's the farmers. There's the workers. There's the new and recent immigrants. Everybody needs to sort of pull together to make that happen. I can't think of a better vehicle to do that than resources.
Yeah, it's
That's
funny.
my little.
Well, no,
world
you're
view.
right. It's amazing because the natural resources, it needs all those different people, and there's opportunity for all those different people, right? There's so many stories of somebody who came along and was able to do something better than someone else in a way that surprises people's expectations based on whatever cultural norms of, oh, this should be a man's job, it should be a woman's job, it should be
Mm-hmm.
a smart person's job, it should be qualified, unqualified. So many different twists and turns to these stories in natural resources. It really takes the best of us right? And that's why I always say lead from the front, right? And I
Yeah,
think I see a lot of that in the Saskatchewan. We need to see more, really. So uh, maybe
yeah,
a specific question for you.
sure.
So 50 years ago versus today, right? There's
Mm.
these things that have changed in the macro. What's changed in the micro? What's changed in the local processing capabilities of helium in these known deposits, versus where we are today and where we might be on a development timeline that makes sense for, RHC shareholders.
Well, as you mentioned, from Royal's viewpoint, you spoke about the press release um, talking about the strategic alliance or partnership with the Saskatchewan Research Council looking at, alternative uses. One of the ideas Andrew and I had is polygeneration. You're going to be drilling for a commodity that's contained in either nitrogen or CO2. What do you do with the CO2 and the nitrogen? Because that probably will be, at least 98% of the gas coming out of the ground. Well, you can't vent the CO2, absolutely not. However, there's actually a need for CO2 for oil field tertiary miscible flood opportunities. Capture it, cycle it back, sequester it. As for the nitrogen, um, convert it into urea, first into ammonia, then into urea fertilizer. The government came out probably a couple months ago with a chemical fertilizer incentive program, which incentivizes companies to look at developing fertilizer production capabilities. That is another way where every last little bit that comes out of the ground can be utilized for something. So the whole idea of
Yeah, that's wonderful. The
polygeneration.
urea market's always been a big question mark to me, and that towards the ammonia, right? Like where
Mhm.
I've always wondered where that came from. It seemed, important, but kind of
Yeah,
crowded uh, crowded, right? Like some ag markets are
yeah.
really pure agricultural markets, but then some
Mhm.
agricultural markets overlap with like industrial minerals or industrial materials, and the ammonia side always seemed a bit like I wondered if ag would get priced out in some
Mhm.
situations in a way that would be really problematic for farmers, right?
Mhm.
Because if you have damage to your soils or whatever, it's big problem, right? So it
Yeah,
was always that was always a question mark for me was, we heard a lot about phosphate and right and
yeah,
NPK, but we never heard about the N, where was the
yeah,
nitrogen and all of it, right? So really glad to hear you mention that. Yeah, and the
yeah.
CO2, the waste gas, glad to hear you say that you won't be dumping that. Good.
No, no.
That's not a reasonable thing that nobody, right? Like, and that's why it has to lead from the front. That's why you have to do the best global standards, is because you have to say, obviously, we're not dumping all this CO2, get out. So and industrial uses of the CO2 make a lot of sense as well, right? And the
Yeah.
processing side of that, if you gear up for that and you can, it becomes somebody can handle that, then is there existing stuff in Saskatchewan for any of that waste gas processing on the nitrogen side or the CO2 yet, Steve?
Well, part of polygeneration, or just the concept of polygeneration, is what's the flow chart look like? Like obviously 2% helium, that'll pull a lot of freight, Peter. But if you can also monetize some of what, the byproducts, in this case, the CO2 and nitrogen, combine that with maybe a potash stream. So you're making potassium nitrate. You're looking at um, an augmented fertilizer product that serves a local market. You're not relying on one thing to make all of your profit on, or to hit your ROI, or make your financials. You're looking at the contribution of a number of value-added commodities. So I like that whole approach, because that can help put the company that's doing polygeneration, again, leading by price. saying, fine, you can go out. It's a crowded market, but we put our product out the cheapest because the inputs that it requires, well, we're splitting the cost of that input among 2 or 3 other substreams. That's an idea that's been talked about, and Saskatchewan's in a unique place to utilize it because there's so many of those bits and pieces lying around here that can be brought in together. Same goes with nuclear and potash, helium. All of those fit that very well. Coal. What about syn fuel? Converting it into a greener synthetic fuel for diesel and for vehicular traffic. So in part, working with SRC, we'll get some of those numbers down, see how it works. On a micro level, back in the 1950s, if we look at helium, seismic, you were lucky if you hit the blob, big blob out there. Were you on the highest part of it? Could you image it? Well, they did pretty good, but also some of the wells, they just skinned it. There is a wealth of 2D and 3D seismic out there that can be purchased cheaply, can be reprocessed, that can really show you what these structures look like. There's advances in geophysics. At Royal, we did a airborne 3-component mag survey. Really gave us some insights into what is down there from a basement viewpoint. All of those little things suddenly add up and de-risk projects that in the 50s and 60s, you're still flipping a coin. That's just some examples, Peter.
Well, and we're still flipping a coin to some degree today. When you look at Royal Helium the last year, right? And it's leveled up from a $5 million market cap to $20 million market cap today, or something like that. It's probably got room to run if you're able to stick the landing on some of these guidance, production numbers, right? Andrew Davidson, the CEO, he's out there in some interviews talking about 1-year paybacks, and some of the banking analyst professionals in Canada. Cormark Securities is out with a report last week, and they're talking about a 1-year payback, and based on industry comparable pricing, and that gives you a lot of wiggle room, right? If you can get in range of that, we really want to hear about that. I really want to hear about that, right? I want to see you do that, and I want to see you do it again and again and again. But high quality performance is the key, and so there is this uncertainty around the downstream, right? And are you doing something that isn't being done right now, would you say?
Well, we're sorting out. We're hopefully soon to conclude our whole land acquisition process. We filed for more permits. Okay. They're coming through on and on. So we'll have more than doubled our land. And part of it is guidance from existing data. There's a lot of existing data out there. So we've added to our land position. So we have a lot of targets, a lot of potential targets in our land base. And it's more a case of ranking them and saying, where do we go next? Than saying, gee, we need more land. So I'm very happy with the land package that we've finally been able to put together.
And if I can interrupt you for a second, I would just say that, at times I've flipped that over in my head and wondered why all the land, how much land do you need? And thinking about, are you going slowly because you're focused on the land, or you're focused on the wrong stuff? And basically the way I've settled on it in my head is that it's like, it's the right thing to do, basically. And the reason is that if you think that this place is going to, bust wide open, and there's going to be a huge area of opportunity that's going to become really clear to a lot of people, then, before you drill that discovery hole and demonstrate, things the first time, you really want to make sure you have as much of it as cheap as possible. And I think that's what you're doing right now. I think you're probably the best positioned in markets to do that work, period. Maybe there are some people privately who can compete with you in some ways, but those people may not have access to public market funding in the same way. Maybe they have private equity backing. But I like doing it in a public vehicle. Yeah, you just look at the financing being way oversubscribed, right? And thinking about, oh, that was $1 million. What can you do with that? And it's like, well, if it's staking, you can do a lot. And really, staking, it may seem like a low value activity to some people today because what's on one claim, right? They don't know, they don't care. But fast forward 6 months, 6 years, and tell me, would you rather have double the land size or half the land size to when it was pennies? And you're looking at, being a generator in
Yeah.
this space, or having some kind of empire of land mass out there with
I've always,
thousands.
I've been fortunate, Peter, in that my role has always been sort of the first person out of the back of the airplane, and early stage exploration and concept generation. And it's pretty much a fairly straightforward process, especially when you're dealing with legacy plays or historical plays or stranded resources. First, find the nuggets, find the historical sweet spots. Then you stake them. And you don't worry, do I have enough? What is that magic number of how many prospects should I have? At this stage, and this is the case with helium, when we started about a year ago, we said, you know what, rather than try to model that, let's just try to get them all.
Yeah,
So
more is better.
More is better. Second, what is the recipe? What's the secret sauce? That's where we're at right now. Getting that down, and there's enough historical data there. There's enough analogs that you can get a very good idea before a drill bit touches the ground. That's the second. Once you've got that figured out, the third is repeat. Repeat, repeat, repeat.
Textbook strategy. I love it. Thank you.
It's not complicated, Peter. There's no magic, and there's no, Andrew and I don't have a massive, 40 sheet Excel. Well, maybe ours is 20 sheets, but there's nothing more to it than what I call classic junior resource exploration, exploitation, value creation, converting a vision into value.
Well, it's hard when you're so far out in front of the crowd, right? Because you guys are, you're outstanding in your field. So that having all that wealth of opportunity where you could do anything next, basically, makes a lot of people don't know they're in way over their head at that point, right? Maybe they have a chance to know what to do in a crowded area, drill some holes, keep it simple. But when you have so many different directions you could go, it's paralyzing if you don't really have that grounding and strategic concept in place. So really glad that that's prominently secured here in the hearts and minds here. What do we say? and the corporate, and what you're doing, the and it's in your news flow. And the beautiful thing is you're writing a story on CDAR. So people, they may read it and think there's nothing going on here. This is slow. One news release every couple months. Oh, this is boring. Bye. Okay. Yeah. We'll see you soon enough.
Yeah, you can't follow that stuff, Peter, if you really want to build really significant value. You got to get the targets. That's patience. 2, figure out the recipe, and I'm sure we'll stub our toe along the way, but at the end of it, we will figure it out and then repeat. And we have the luxury of repeating many, many times.
A question from a friend online. He wondered about recasing or reworking old wells that hit the target horizon and some of the good mix of gas? Are you able to access some of those old holes, all of those, none of those old holes? What is the thinking there?
We've got some where there is a legacy hole where we've got a historical assay, and those are really good from the viewpoint of minimizing drilling risk. Now, there's two ways of looking at it. There is, the thought that you re-enter the old well, you go down to the horizon and you test the horizon, but there's as much risk in doing that, probably more risk doing that than simply going 100 feet away and just re-drilling the hole. If
Yep.
you re-drill it, you can you have much better control over the downhole environment.
Well, and I agree. To my friend Will Irvine, who asked that question, I think he asked it publicly on Twitter. Will, you hear what Steve's saying there, and I totally agree with him. And Steve, I'd say to you that I hope you really push the future tech angle on the drill bit. On the drill bit.
Yeah.
I hope you have downhole instrumentation, that's giving you real-time surveying, gravity, seismic, electromag. Like I don't think you can get any geochem sensors in the drill bit yet. But 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 50 years from now, that's sooner than later. But
mud logging has advanced so that you can be, maybe it's not immediately at the drill bit, but pretty close.
Yeah.
So that
good.
Gas detection can include helium during the process of drilling. One of the good things about a lot of historical holes is you can look at them and there's usually borehole logs and such. You can figure the geology out. The bad thing is they weren't drilled with helium in mind, looking for oil. So they probably were not properly equipped during the drilling to, measure mud gases, to properly sample all horizons.
Well, and what were their casings like? That's really is like the whole integrity and the safety issues. I don't want I don't want to use an old hole that you're at risk of it caving when the pressure comes and then there's a blip in the pressure and the thing like no, that makes me concerned safety wise.
Nowadays, with the new drilling technology, telescopic doubles, with top drives, you can drill down to basement 2,800 meters. Less than 14 days, you can be down, test, evaluate, and move on. So even the drilling technology has changed so much. One of the historic holes I was looking at, drilled by Imperial, it was 144 days in the drilling to get down to 2,900 meters. The cover sheets sound like a prairie version of Moby Dick.
Yeah.
People are drilling deep. I've had people say to me, it's going to take you months and all drilling problems. Maybe in 1960. I don't know so much now.
I love it.
A good example.
I love it when you get those misconceptions. You talk to somebody who's from the area or knows people from the area, used to live there, moved away, and he's telling you he knows exactly, and you should listen to him because he'll tell you about what's going to go wrong and why it's not going to work and why you shouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. We probably should listen to that person, and we should probably go through the checklist and make sure that we've addressed all the things that he's talking about, because there's good reasons that he's saying them, and they're probably all moot. But let's double check it anyways, right? So
we'll double check it anyway. Oh, we can check this one off. Do not use a cable tool rig. Check mark.
I do this all the time online, Steve, when I'm talking with people about stocks and stuff. Sometimes people are a little sideways and it's tough to do this, but some people come at it pretty head on and they tell you what's wrong, and those are sometimes they're shareholders who are well-meaning and they want they're genuinely invested and they're just frustrated by not understanding that they're in a junior mining stock with no liquidity, and so
the thing though to keep in mind, we can't get too arrogant or such, because I find that in every little cautionary tale, if you really listen, you'll learn something.
Absolutely.
And I never discount someone who says, well, back in such and such a day, because they're great learning opportunities.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I like it when someone comes and says, I don't think that's going to work, Steve, for the following reasons, and having a discussion about that, because sometimes there's a point to be made. I've changed my mind many times just through that listening process. And, sharpening a pencil with a knife. One stroke of the knife won't get a sharp point. Takes a while, to get that perfect point. Each time, hone it a little bit better, and then you will have something that will make a mark.
Agreed. Wholeheartedly agreed.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just read out a couple headlines here for you in the last
Sure.
couple of minutes of conversation here.
Yep.
Royal Helium, September 2019, Royal Helium completes first phase at its Climax Helium exploration project and identifies drill targets. So that was the geophysics survey that you mentioned.
No, I think that was a 2D.
Okay.
That was a 2D.
Thank you.
And reprocess. The geophysics was done. It was done this spring, I think.
Right.
May.
So this was it says in June of this year, Royal purchased a 2D seismic at Climax. Yeah. So this was you in September last fall, you were reporting on reprocessing old data, which is again one of my favorite things, right? Because that's just desktop work. That's literally new things in old places. If you're doing new statistical methods and reprocessing the data and having a new analyst look at it, that's new things in old places. Wonderful. November 2019, Royal acquires additional helium permits at Climax. So what about these permits? What do we know? Are those production permits or drilling exploration permits, or the same thing?
The drilling exploration permits, and part of it was that we realized permits should have been a little bit bigger so we could get, the whole basement or the whole feature. So we augmented the permits that we had by adding 2 more. So that was just rationalizing our land, and that sort of started a process of looking at all of our land holdings, because Royal's got as much land in southeast Saskatchewan as it does in the southwest. We're focusing in the southwest, but there's in the south. And
I didn't know that.
It was looking. Yeah, we've got as much land in the southeast as the southwest, and some really good helium shows further east.
Beautiful. May 2020, skip ahead here a bit. Royal announces strategic collaboration with Saskatchewan Research Council to develop a helium facility. That was May 27, 2020.
Yep.
And you mentioned Polygeneration in that news release.
Yep.
So a lot of the stuff we were talking about here today, and thank you for that. How's that going with them?
Getting the work started. Part of it over the summer is we're just busy with a lot of other things, more land, the financing, but we're getting that started up.
Always junior mining companies, one round after another. July 16th, 2020, Royal identifies 5 additional drill targets in southeast Saskatchewan. Okay, so what you were saying about the large land package in southeast, and we're starting to number off targets now too. I remember a recent news release mentions 12 targets, so counting them off 5 here. So there, and maybe we'll talk again another time about really what those are. Talk about some maps and different materials that might be available at some point. Please and thank you. June.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, please.
No. That's looking at southeast. Same thing. We did a 3D acquisition and reprocessing, looking for targets on a permit.
Well done.
I think that's what was connected with that press release.
Keep it coming. Keep the news flow coming. Every time you guys stake something, I want to hear about it. Some people might think that's too much, but I think when you're doing large blocks with old showings, or good geological concepts, I want to hear about those. And July.
Pretty much all of them are based on geological review, either, it's a legacy drill hole or a basement feature, trend basement features. So we're not going
Yeah.
out and just hodgepodge leasing everything. We're being very strategic and targeting. That's why it's taken a bit of time to,
Well,
write some permits so that we
and
cover just enough.
and the permitting that comes in with that, thank you for mentioning that, right? It's really important to have a team in country, in province, who knows how to navigate that. And as you
Mm-hmm.
said, staking ground of merit. Staking's cheap, but I still don't want you to be doing, real crazy wildcat stuff. I think there's enough
Yeah.
low-hanging fruit to begin with that start with the known things, and right, and some of the obvious stuff that you can assemble from your modeling.
Yeah.
And I trust that's what you're doing, and
Yeah.
that's why I want to hear about it in the news flow, and you have been providing that, so thank you.
That's why it's taken a bit of time, because I've never been a believer in land plays where you simply go and take masses of acreage. That's expensive to keep in good standing. It
Well,
ties up a lot of land, and you're in the real estate business. We're in the production.
it blows my
One of
mind that people justify a business model where they will stake such large amounts of land and then they won't work it themselves. They'll wait for somebody
Mhm.
else to come along and option the ground from them, and then they work the land. It's like, why did you stake so
Yeah.
much land in the begin with? Why wouldn't you stake a smaller patch, show it has merit, find somebody who really wants to do something serious on something with some, like, yeah, same page,
Look,
Steve.
it gets back to my exploration philosophy. Get the targets, but they have to be real targets. Figure out the recipe and then repeat. That's really the way to convert a vision into value. Anything else is just speculation. You're just a speculator. Maybe someone will come along with deep pockets and buy it, but then someone may not.
Well, I'm nothing if not a speculator over here. Sometimes I like to say patient speculator, Steve.
Yeah.
July
Well,
16th.
go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead.
just July 16th, 5 additional targets, right? So adding to the list. And
Mm-hmm.
again, Southeast, like I said, yeah. And then July 20th, Mr. Sylvain Laberge from Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful to see him get involved here. And July 30th, readies for the first drill program.
Mm-hmm.
So this was...
go ahead.
Well, I remember hearing about this, right? And there was some
Mm-hmm.
discussion, and people were confused about, is Royal going to drill? When are they going to drill? What are they going to drill?
Mm-hmm.
And so for the headline to say, that we're readying, that doesn't mean mobilizing, does it?
No, doesn't mean
Certainly not.
Mobilize.
Right.
And there's things that have to be done, and I leave that to Andrew's decision and judgment, because he is the CEO. He drives the Royal bus. My job is to make sure the bits and pieces are in place so that we can move fast. We can change direction. We're flexible. We have Plan B and Plan C and Plan D. So that's been very much my focus.
And you don't write the headlines of the news releases or the material in the news releases,
Nope.
I wouldn't think, for the most part. Maybe some of the technical ones.
I review the technical side, but I stay.
That's right.
I'm not.
And you are the QP.
Yes.
Thank you for doing that for the company. It's really important to have sophisticated, qualified person, and somebody who's really engaged in the business too. It blows my mind when I meet companies and the QP is a signatory. That's, if you're really you guys are trying to tackle a large opportunity here, and really important to have the right expertise on deck throughout.
And part of our, we're patient, and we also, we're technically and professionally cautious. It's easy to make a misstep. It's easy to get yourself into a situation where you go, oh no. So we're methodical. We've got a strategy. We've got a process, and we're working our way through that, Peter.
Appreciate it. As a shareholder here, I really value that, in management teams and junior. There's
Mm-hmm.
so much risk in this business that to have some plan is really essential.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk
Yep.
about being a patient speculator, but I may also call myself an impatient speculator sometimes too. Haven't joked with anybody about that, but there's definitely a line of thinking, right? That you have to be impatient in some cases as well.
Maybe a better word is aggressive.
Yep.
Aggressive risk balanced speculator. How about that one?
And you just said, that you're professionally conservative in some ways too, right? So is aggressive the right word? It's, words fail us to some degree with a lot of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's all about the execution.
Yeah, we can't describe it, but we know what we're talking about. And I think most people in the resource business also kind of get that.
Well, and the value of you and I, doing some of these chats right now, right, is the fact that there's a whole bunch of new people looking at the resource markets. Maybe they haven't looked at them in a while, or maybe they've never looked at them. And there's a lot, right? There's a lot of opportunity for good and for bad. So, even us just going back and forth here, talking about, our own philosophy on how to approach things and what we're up to here. There's a bunch of information, right, that we can kind of leave for people to find at some point. And yeah, the value of the internet and all that stuff just is amazing with the information sharing.
That's true. And with that comes responsibility. You got to make the hard call sometime. But that's the only way to do it. And I've been around long enough to realize that. There's no quick way.
September 21st, Royal Helium adds 321 square kilometers of new helium permits in Saskatchewan. And here we are just a few days ago.
Yeah.
Right. So
hammer
down.
Yeah. That's part of the, target. Well, not target, but just sweeping up shows, expanding our permits, right-sizing our permits, following trends. So very targeted. And, it takes a while for the government to process it. This is work done earlier this summer. And I'm looking forward to having them in the, call it, royal asset base. And I get it. How much land do you need? Do you need a whole bunch? Well, you want just enough so that you've got the majority of targets, and you've got a flexibility of targets, and you've got a catalog of locations. That's what oil companies have done for a long, long time, maintain that portfolio. I don't see why other resources shouldn't look at it the same way.
Well, Steve, you might be early. You might be early on a big opportunity that's coming our way. If I find with cycles and natural resource cycles, if you hang around long enough from the last cycle, you'll be early for the next one.
There you go. I've said for centuries, years, my business plan, when someone would say about, how do you grow your consulting business? I'd say, well, my business plan is attrition. I wait till my competitors retire or
yeah.
So,
well, and science progresses.
I'm in that same position. I don't know if that's a good business strategy, Peter.
Well, and they say science progresses one funeral at a time too. So it's a scary thought, but that's why we got to be in a rush. That's why you got to be impatient when you have the time to do it, right?
Yeah,
so
that's right. That's right.
Steve Halabura, Royal Helium, thanks very much for talking to me today.
Thank you. I enjoyed our chat, Peter. Good luck on your future columns and posts. I follow them.
Thanks. I'll need it. I'll see you online.